This conference with a plenary session with two very interesting presenters. First, David Kinsella from the University of Limerick, and Jesper Jespersen from Aalborg University and Roskilde University. Thank you. Stephen, a few years ago, you told a group of young PhD students that one reason for doing SOC modeling was that it includes a lot of fun. So, with that in mind, I'll sit down and enjoy your presentation.
Thank you. So it's really nice to be here, and thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me along. I am here, as I've been telling almost everybody who listen, I'm here 7 years to the week. When I came here to examine a PhD at Aalborg 7 years ago, and as I was walking in, this week exactly, as I was walking into the defence, I went, for the day, and my Italian co-examiner said, have you heard about this volcano? And I said, what volcano? And he said, oh, you will. So I spent 10 days here, thanks to the volcano, which was lovely. And so it's really nice to be back, and it's really nice to see everyone again. It's also really nice to see this crowd, which is brilliant. So the organisers asked me to give this talk, this specific talk, and the title is they asked me to talk about SFC as a unique offering, which sounds very sales. It sounds like I'm trying to sell you guys stock flow consistent modeling. Now, I kind of bristled a little bit about this title, and I thought, no, I'm not engaged in sales. And then I thought, hang on, what have I been doing for the last couple of years? Well, selling this to policymakers. I have been engaged in sales. Many of my co-authors and my colleagues have been expanding the theoretical and empirical kind of underpinnings of this discipline and this kind of brilliant way of thinking. And many of my students have been examining different aspects of this theory. But if I look at what I've actually been doing on a day-to-day basis, it's basically been selling the idea and marketing it. So that's sort of what I want to talk about today. So it's preaching to the converted, but it's also maybe to give you some insights into the kinds of questions I'm sure many of you get asked already and the kind of answers that I give. So maybe you can give me some pointers as to how you respond to some of these questions. I mean, obviously, presumably some of you go, just shut up and walk away, right? But many of you may actually have better answers to this than me, so that'd be cool if we could get that into the discussion. And also maybe to give you a sense of how policymakers view this kind of work. So, okay, what's this about? This is essentially my group of answers to interested but skeptical economists. So they ask, what is this about? What's different about it? What's interesting about it? What's new about it? Oh, isn't this just okay, but, right? So there's a common series of queries, common series of rejoinders, right? And when you have to explain this stuff to a mainstream economist, you do get a sense of what you think is important about it and what other people may think is important about it. And what are the attributes of this kind of modeling you can most easily explain and defend while you are in the process of explaining and defending it. What is absolutely true about this work and this way of thinking is that it gives you a fidelity with the data that most macroeconomists don't have and most central bankers don't have. And I think there's a real sense of superiority actually when it comes to some of this stuff, which is nice. So my objective here is not methodological purity. I'm not interested in being a true post-Keynesian. I don't know, I read, obviously I've read Mark's books in detail, whether you should capitalize the P in post-Keynesian, that kind of stuff I don't really care about. I'm not trying to be a true post-Keynesian. I think my objective normally is to be constructive and not critical. I want to talk with our mainstream colleagues. I want to be useful to policymakers above all. But I also want to retain what's truly unique about this way of thinking. What is really interesting is people will often say, oh, well, that's kind of like a DSGE, and if you only just added a production function, and I'm going, no. no. And they say, why? Why no? But it's really interesting. And then you go, well, then you have to stop, because you're like, am I going to walk down a path with this person about the aggregation of capital? Because I need that, they're skeptical and they don't need to hear all this stuff. I just have to go, look, you have to trust me, it's not a very good way of doing it. I've got a better way of talking about it. Right? And so my stance on this stuff is constructive dissent. Right? So I identify as a heterodox economist, sure. But I want to build an alternative. I really want to help build an alternative that policymakers can use. Right. So what is unique about this? Okay. So the principle of effective demand. This as you'll see in the next slide, this generates models that are demand-led. And when you say that to a mainstream or economist or a central banker, they go, well, our models also have demand. And you say, yes, but most of the adjustment is happening in prices and stuff. It's not really happening in terms of demand. Most of the action is on the supply side, especially in the modern macro models. And they go, oh, okay, fine, right. So you guys have the government doing everything. You say, yeah. And they say, you must all be left-wingers. And I say, well, yeah. Yeah. That's okay. But you have to skip to where your political core is, right? Because this is political economy. So the central banker says, so you're a lefty. So that means you like the government and the state stuff. And they go, yeah, but you work for the state. You are the state. You are the central bank, right? So you clearly like the state too, or you wouldn't work in the state. There are no private central banks, although Goldman Sachs wants to be one, but there are no private central banks. And they go, okay, all right, so they'll accept that. Time dynamics, the traverse. So this idea that we're not really dealing with an equilibrium system that's adjusting upwards and downwards to some station steady state, right? The principle that you respect time is moving forward. Sometimes we call this non-archivicity, all this kind of stuff, but really just the fact that we think dynamics and we take it kind of seriously, right? These doctrines of reasonable rationality, sometimes it's bounded rationality, ontological uncertainty. When you say ontological uncertainty to people, they assume that you have just sneezed, right? I was examining a PhD in Dublin recently, and I asked the PhD student, what are your ontological priors? And this guy had been answering questions about identification, assumptions in econometrics and all this stuff. And he looked at me like all the blood drained out of his face. And he just went, excuse me? And I said, what are your ontological priors? What do you believe? And he went, belief? Belief? And I said, no, like, seriously, where do you stand in the philosophy of science? And it was like I'd asked him to bark. That's the only way I could describe it. Anyway, that notion of okay, people are much more willing to accept the doctrine of ontological uncertainty after Brexit. They're you show them a futures market after Brexit. The futures market is going like this: Euro, Great British Pound, or something like that. You show them the futures market and it's ticking, and then Brexit happens and it goes up by 4,000%, and then it goes back down. They're willing to accept it. They're willing to accept it a lot better. This is really important. Faithfulness to the data. Many of the people who are the students in particular in the room have probably heard the mantra, get the data, get the data, get the data first a few times. Macro models in particular, queuing densely and closely to the spirit of the national accounts. That turns out to be incredibly important. And then there's kind of this political core, right? But this kind of belief that the economy is not self-adjusting to some mean. So what does this mean in terms of the uniqueness of the modeling strategy? Well, demand-driven models integrating real markets and real analysis and flow of funds, right? That's very important. We begin from G, right? So all of you probably studied the SIM model. It starts from the government printing off some money. And I think that's really important. So we recognize that it starts from there. I remember Antoine Godard, who's probably somewhere in this room, talking about trying to construct a supply side stock flow consistent model. It was like, I remember asking him, like, that sounds like trying to get a cat to bark. You know, it's just a bit odd, but you can certainly do it. Interdependencies, portfolio shows household consumption, you all know this. Targeting for sectors, cost pricing, the way we treat costs in this model really matters. The sectoral models. Mainstream central bankers have a really, really big problem when you rock up and you say, yes, I have the household sector. And they go, right, what are the households doing? And you say, I don't know. And they, no, what individual households, like what are they doing? What's their utility function? I have no idea. I don't know. I know what the household sector is doing because I have data on the household sector, but I don't know. I can't tell you what household I is doing. And they go, oh, so you have no micro foundations? Yes. So you were exposed to the Lucas critique. And you say, what is the Lucas critique? And they go, and they remember back to the second year of college. And they say, something about econometric models not being good. That's a very, very senior central banker. That was his actual answer. Honestly, your fortunes are in this man's hands. Yeah, I think there was a great presentation yesterday about Luke's critique mattering, but Lucas's solution to it being kind of stupid. I think it does matter, and I do think we have to address it. I don't think we've adequately addressed it, but it's there. And the model is beginning from the government. Okay. So it's realized with the data, right? These models, they begin life empirically, not theoretically. Right? They begin life with Godley at the Treasury in the 50s and 60s, and then at Cambridge in the 70s. It turns out that simply checking for flow consistency, stock flow consistency in the data generates a lot of insights before you do any modeling. That's a really big thing. It sounds easy, but it's a very big thing. And to policymakers who don't actually look at this data very much, it's a revelation. So one of the things that I learned from dealing with DSGE modelers over a 3-4 year now period is that they actually don't know the data that well. They know the real side of the economy pretty well, but they've never actually had to model the financial side. So they don't really delve into this stuff, right? And I think that's kind of very useful. Because spending a lot of time staring at these flow of funds data, and you get a real sense of how high or low quality, just spoiler alert, low quality data most economies generate in the flow of funds. You also get a sense of how the economy is moving, and you personally get a lot of intuition for the economy itself. But I think, if anything, that is the biggest benefit to this kind of work, is that you're staring at the data and you personally get a really good sense of what's going on in that model. And the sectoral models are there to generate macro financial insights, right? So there's a series of really good models by Gennaro Zezza from the Levy Institute. There's a couple of really interesting models from Andrew Jackson and his colleagues, and Yanis Defermos. Stephen Burgess and his colleagues have done some work on this. It's very much in its infancy, but it's really interesting work. And a lot of it takes Godley's 1999 unsustainable processes as a model for how you should kind of do this sort of scholarship, right? So how is this sort of realized? Okay, well, there's, I've read a fair bit of Godley's work. So what is it? He says it's basically that the macroeconomy is coherent at the balance sheet level, right? That's sort of what he says. And then something along the lines of, well, if everything's coherent, is working together, and there's a sustained deviation off there for some reason, we don't know why, eventually that will stop. An unsustainable process cannot be sustained. Right? It sounds really stupid, but it's a fundamental point, right? The trend will reassert itself, which is a really interesting way of saying it. So I've had lots of colleagues who are in the mainstream who read this stuff and go, okay, so you do have an equilibrium idea in the back of your head, like eventually things will adjust back down. And I said, no, not really. Just things that are going to explode will explode. That's not the same as saying, no, actually, come back down and to some putative equilibrium, right? But it is interesting that you say, well, you can't allow credit relative to GDP, household credit relative to GDP, to expand infinitely. It needs to stop at some point, right? And they go, oh, okay, right, so it'll come down again. So it goes up and comes down. You go, yeah. So eventually, what is interesting is you find yourself making these arguments like, if thing go up, then thing go down. Happy? And they go, happy. That's fine. You often find yourself explaining things in very simple things. And you find your people, right? So it turns out, I have a band, I want to make a band, and I want to call the band The Flow of Funds, because I just think it would be great fun, right? So this is a t-shirt I actually got made. The ONS, so the ONS, the Office of National Statistics in the UK, and the Bank of England are doing this project to make the national accounts and the flow of funds accounts much more coherent with one another, because they see that this is really important. Yeah, and it is really interesting. You talk to economists about this kind of stuff, and they go, "Oh, microfoundations." And you talk to statisticians about this stuff, and they go, oh, "Somebody's using the flow of funds accounts! Hooray!" They get very excited. So the flow of funds nerds really like this stuff. So maybe our audience, if you like, the people to sell the ideas to, are in the statistics community. Maybe not anything else. But I think this is really important. So this is sort of one of the big claims to fame. This is Godley's work on the US economy. So during the past 7 years, persistently restrictive fiscal policy coincided with sluggish net export demand, and so rapid growth could only come about as a result of a spectacular rise in private expenditure relative to income. And later on he says, if private expenditure reverts to its normal relationship with income, there will be, given present fiscal plans, a severe and unusually protracted recession. That's quite a good claim to fame. He was sort of right, wasn't he? He was sort of right, and he got some of the mechanisms right too. But behind that theory, that statement, is a lot of work, a really deep economic intuition, but also a notion that there are these norms, these stock flow norms, that are kind of acting on the economy to pull it back into place. And it's really interesting, the discussion of stock flow norms, when you talk to a mainstream person, they go, oh, debt to GDP, unemployment rate, they see this stuff, right? They do get it. They get that there are these central tendencies in the data. So here, actually this is kind of hard to read. What I did was, I've been working on a paper to kind of take Godley's, the ratios that Godley created in his 7 unsustainable processes, and just create them for every economy in Europe. And it's great fun, actually. It's really good fun doing. And so here, the one up there, this is Danish data, because we're in Denmark, so why not? It was only a few clicks. So that's real private expenditure and disposable income, right? So the blue, oh, it's going to work, yeah. So that's real private expenditure, and that's disposable income. So you can see in the Danish case, it sort of starts around 1995 and finishes in 2016. You just see that there's been very little of a bump there, and the idea would be, if these two things diverge from one another substantially, well, there's probably a debt buildup. Here's Godley's combined fiscal trade ratios. So the idea is like G over theta, and then exports and imports. And you can see you want these things to be moving together roughly. There's the crisis. You want these things to be moving together, and then that's in levels, and this is in rates. So what you can do is you can then show so here the blue line is Denmark, and the orange line here is Ireland, right? So you can see Denmark has just kind of sailed along, right? This is the adjusted fiscal ratio, and Ireland has not sailed along. In fact, you can see there's a fair bit of an oil crisis in the middle there, right? That's a tiny open economy having a heart attack, right there. Here, I really like it. That's exactly how it felt at the time as well. Here's private financial balances in the private sector. So that's lending and the private financial balance, and you can see the big swing there in 2007. Again, this is back to the Danish data. You can see this really big swing into saving and investment just for Denmark, right? So this kind of stuff. Now, what's really important about this kind of stuff? It's hard to read on the slide, but you can get this. You can put this together by getting the national accounts from Eurostat, downloading them, making a coherent matrix out of them, and basically displaying them using R or Python or whatever you want yourself. You have not done any modeling yet, right? No modeling has happened. There hasn't been a single number regressed on any other number. You are already far beyond where most central bankers are with this kind of data, right? Central bankers do not look at this kind of stuff. It's not the kind of thing that they're interested in. Sorry, that's not true. They are interested in it. They just don't know they're interested in it. And when I show this to the guys, they're like, "My God, this is. Where are you getting this data?" I said, "Well, it's your data." This kind of stuff is very important and very interesting to look at. What's true about this is that it's a very restricted set of stock flow norms. You could probably generate a procedure to find many, many more stock flow norms in the data yourself, right? Just have a program, search the space of available data for things that are called stocks, things that are called flows, divide one by the other and define some stability condition. And that's sort of what I'm doing at the moment in my own work. But what's really interesting about this idea is that all of a sudden you have comparisons and you've done no data. So I ended up spending a lot of my time explaining stock flow norms to central bankers. And they said, "Well, where does this idea come from?" So Late's Macroeconomica article in 2015, for example, obviously cites Godley and Lavoie, and Godley and Lavoie cite Godley and Cripps. Godley and Cripps cite this dude Rowe in the Economic Journal, and they cite this guy McKean in 1949. So you go through the web of scholarship, and you kind of go find the thing, and then you go read these papers. So there's Rowe 1973 is really interesting article, but he essentially bases all of his work on McKean. So McKean's 1949 article is arguing that we should create a national balance sheet. I agree. I hope you all agree too, right? So he says we need a national balance sheet. And here is McKean's argument for that. McKean says, in interpreting his balance sheet, of course there are no women, right? It's 1949. Women haven't been invented yet. Interpreting his balance sheet, the businessman uses various ratios, not just one ratio to help gauge his liquidity position. He does not, of course, blind himself to other guides, changes in individual items, etc. During periods of contraction, alert businessmen, bankers, and investors, recognizing impaired liquidity positions due to altered collectability of claims, newly lived debts, probably require higher asset-debt ratios, and of those whom they extend credit. Again, the economists can follow suit. Within the nation's balance sheet, several ratios can be observed, not mechanically, but in the light of changes in individual items, price levels, and moneyness of assets and liabilities. So, where does the concept come from? It comes from the notion that in business people use ratios to guide their decisions, and we should too, which is entirely common sense. So I would imagine, this is a fairly flimsy way, in my opinion, to base a truly fundamental notion. But that is where McKean's idea of using this ratio-based analysis from a national balance sheet comes from. It's a nice paper too. So, go back to Godley and Cripps and to get a bit of intuition on this. Stock variables will not change indefinitely as ratios to related flow variables. That's a nicer way of thinking about this. Okay, so if you just think it from the consumption function, the idea is, well, consumption is some fraction of your disposable income and then some fraction of your wealth from previous periods, and then you let C that there be 1 minus A over B, and that C is some stock flow norm, right? So here's Godley and Lavoie, some 60 years after McKean. It's the assumed wealth to income target ratio, which is implicitly embedded into the consumption function, whenever the target level of wealth is higher than the realized level households save in an attempt to reach their target. So it's some kind of, Lance Taylor called it a magic ratio later on. Right. Well, turns out you could just estimate that number. What does that number look like? You could do it for every country in Europe. I have, and it's great fun to do it. So you run a regression on consumption, gross disposable income for the flow of funds, nerds in the room. Those are the codes. If you want to get the data yourself, B6G, N111N, and net financial assets, BF90. Now, here's your, I know some people in the room are like slugs with salt when it comes to econometrics. And so you must take these results with a barrel and not a pinch of salt. Why is this? Many reasons. First off, these are non-stationary data, obviously. Second off, there's only about 25 observations. And third off, it's more of a fun exercise than trying to figure out anything else. Here's what it looks like. So B6G for the UK. So that's, if you like, that 1.0004, whatever. That's, if you like, disposable income. The UK is wealth, so it's nearly zero. And the period here is about 1995 to 2015, that kind of time. So about 20, 25 observations, that kind of. You drop a few for lags, because this is lagged by 1 year, just for fun. So what do you see? C is pretty close to 1 for the UK. It's slightly over 1 for Denmark, for Germany, and for Denmark it's actually quite high. See, fairly high over this period. Meaning that, so the implication is that maybe Danish people like to save more. Who knows? We'll see. It's interesting as a thought exercise to have a go at this. Again, I wouldn't be making policy on the basis of these regressions, but it's very interesting to get a picture of what's going on in this way. Okay, so this is interesting. I like this picture. So when you divide total consumption over net disposable income, which is P3 divided by B6N, again for the flow of funds nerds. This is just for Denmark. You could do it for any country in the Eurozone, even do it for the UK. It'll be there for a while more, I guess. What do you see? You see the ratio of total consumption dipping in the 2000s, peaking there around 2006, and then falling the whole time to 2015, implying a kind of a leveraging process, consuming a bit less, that kind of thing. So I like this kind of idea of just hunting out new and more interesting ways. Think about this. Again, for Denmark, gross disposable income over total wealth. Already you can see, look at the error bars, much wider, right? Much wider. And you can see again, it's gross disposable income, B6G, and then it's divided by housing wealth and net financial assets. You can see there's this drop to the 2000s, massive increase, and then a return again. But it's a much noisier piece of data. Okay, so now you get to the so what part. So people are like, all right, fine, so you can show us things in the data we can't. That's fine. That's cool. But that's just visualization, isn't it? That's not interesting. It's not economics. First off, most central bankers do not look at the output of models and say, well, this is what should guide our decisions. Most of the time they make the decision and then they construct a model to justify the decision. And so they look at the data, they look at trends, and they look at many pieces all together. So already showing policymakers what they can't is a very valuable thing to do. But they might say, well, look, okay, even in mainstream models, persistent disequilibria result in large financial imbalances, and you get Minsky type effects. So, we can do that kind of stuff ourselves. And I say, yes, but you can't track these stocks and flows the way we can. It's non-trivial for you guys. If you want to be able to spot a buildup of, assets in the ICPF sector or liabilities, you want to have a way of tracking this and a way of visualizing that. That's actually really important before you do any modeling. And they say, oh, no. Aren't these all macro models stock flow consistent? So here I must point the finger at somebody who's not here, Claudio dos Santos, who described these models as stock flow consistent. It is a regret. I must admit I have cursed his name many times. He's a lovely man, but cursed his name many times by calling these things stock flow consistent. Because the first thing people say is, well, aren't all models stock flow consistent? Here's a quote from Simon Wren-Lewis. Any correctly specified closed mathematical macro model should be internally consistent and therefore stock flow consistent. This is certainly true of DSGE models. Go away. And I say yes, but they're trivially stock flow consistent. They have very few financial assets. Interestingly, a paper by John Maloney suggests that this kind of stock flow consistent idea was actually borrowed from Godley and his colleagues by mainstream macro guys, thus forcing every post-Keynesian economist to eat an irony sandwich as they explain what this is to other people. Like I said, when you're checking for flow consistency, stock flow consistency, and stock consistency, a lot of the time you actually surface that these models are not trivially stock flow consistent. Okay, you often do find magic assumptions coming in different places. There is a really interesting critique. Lance Taylor in 2008 in the CJE it was a review. I think it was like a 25-page review of the Godley and Lavoie book. He had this kind of critique of magic ratios. And what was interesting about his critique was it wasn't really a critique at all. And he said, you're relying on these stock flow norms to kind of hold the thing together. But there are magic ratios in every major discipline, right? Quantity theory of money is a magic ratio. Yeah, monetarists have magic ratios. Real business cycle people have magic ratios. At least ours come from the data, right? It is interesting that mainstream central bankers will not admit actually that you generally have they generally have magic at the base as well, and they say, yeah, okay, right, so you do more with the data, find more assets, but we actually have most of these ideas in modern models. And I say no. I pull out Mark's latest book. Is it the latest book? It's the latest book, right? Which is 2015. And what's good about Mark's latest book is not only is it encyclopedic with respect to post-Keynesian economics, but it's big enough that if you want to hit somebody, you're going to do serious damage. Like you're like they're not walking away. It's a big book, right? It's just good. So here's a picture that I took on my phone. Here, I really like this. I really like this kind of thing. These macro paradoxes, and I think macro evolves through trying to understand paradoxes. I sort of have this spasmodic interest in history of economic thought, and I think it does have a lot of this, right? So the paradox of public deficits, paradox of debt, paradox of tranquility, liquidity, risk, profit-led demand. I know I shouldn't say profit-led and wage-led. Wrong crowd, but these ideas, they're not. I think it's very important that these questions are not easily answered by mainstream models, and I really liked Peter Scott's quote using the Kahneman quote yesterday about people just sort of forget after a long time that these things are there because they've known nothing different. So, for example, mainstream models cannot explain the paradox of tranquility, right? Credit leads to its own reversal. They've tried very diligently to include these things in their models. I still don't think they're there. So there's a possibility to maybe explain more with these models. No, this is just accounting. It's not economics. You're just doing accounting. And I said, well, there is a lot of economics there, right? But honestly, you get quite far by doing the accounting right. It's not easy to do the accounting right. People go a little bit crazy trying to get the accounting right, but especially with real data. But there's theory in two places. How you concatenate the data. You've got the stock flow models are sparse matrices. A real flow of funds model is not a sparse matrix. You've got to kind of pull these things together. So how you concatenate the data, what sectors you model, how you actually specify the model. for calibration and simulation as well. Okay, but these models have to be unstable. Look, these models have to be unstable, right? Is that true? Well, in the simulation exercises that I've done for many years, they kind of are unstable. I don't think we can solve it right now. Jufrey and Rosenbaum have had a good first try at it. Why? Fundamentally, we're not dealing with non-stationary data. That's fundamentally the problem. There are ways to think about econometrics with non-stationary data, and I don't think we've gotten there yet. Aren't these just badly specified structural econometric models? Therefore, open to the Lucas critique. Many people criticize the Burgess et al. Model, saying, look, it's just kind of a crap structural econometric model. You guys haven't really done your work in understanding the history of economic thought in this area. And they say, well, you know, they look toy-like. The econometrics are kind of simple enough that they look toy-like to DSG modelers who run Bayesian vector autoregressions for breakfast, right? Because you're doing that kind of stuff. I believe that's not true. I think there's a lot more going on there. But I do believe that we're going to end up moving to more elaborate estimation methods. In my view, that's actually just window dressing. It's virtue signaling. It's saying, look, we can do the difficult dives, right? I don't think the fundamental point will be changed. Okay, very interesting. Set up a Google Scholar alert for stock flow consistent. I actually think many of our topics are converging to the mainstream. You know, if you asked what people do, they work on fiscal policy, financialization, distribution, shadow banking, monetary circuits, exchange rates, the economy, ecology, that kind of stuff. Using VECM, VAR, OLS, various simulation methods and solution methods, which is exactly what people in the mainstream are looking at, right? So I think it's, if you compare post-Keynesian economics in the 90s to post-Keynesian economics in the 2000s and what we're looking at today, I think just because we're being dragged along by the persistent policy questions, we're kind of converging topics to the mainstream. It's also a bit of a boom industry, right? So this is just the papers in Scopus. So the papers in Scopus, you can see there's been a large jump. I know we're not fans of causality here, but I'm going to say 2007 was a big year for stock flow consistent papers, right? You don't need a t-test. There's a big change, right? There's a dip there for 2017's data, but it's there. You get this idea. There's a lot more work going on, right? And to get a sense of how it's moved on, in 2011 I knocked out a little paper called Words to the Wise. It was like a little discussion paper. But what I said was, okay, in 2011, stock flow consistent modeling needed to cope with newer estimation strategies. Ciuffio and Rosenbaum did that in 2014. Then we needed to have some stab at 8 micro foundations. Kayani et al., Van der Hoog et al., many other people have had a decent go at bringing SFC into agent-based modeling. They needed to deal with complexity and stability issues. Mitchell, Dallery, many other people have had this thing. I actually would argue we still don't understand the role of prices in these models well. Viewing sensibly on uncertainty, the Firmus and the JPKE, the Sandus and the CJE. Clear policy impacts everyone has worked on: austerity, macroprudential policy. Papadimitriou's paper with the Levy Institute, for example, and connect to policymakers and show some relevance. Zeza et al. Has done a lot of work, Burgess et al., Fennell et al., and so forth. So there's lots and lots of progress, right? I see lots and lots of progress coming along, and I in the 10 years that I've been working on this stuff, I see lots of this progress as I supervise PhDs and examine review papers and that kind of stuff. So it's cool. It's cool. So have you ever been in a public place and needed to dance, but not really known that you could? Does that make any sense? So big fan of Twitter. Pulled out my phone one day, and I saw this tweet, and I did a little dance on the street. People were looking at me like, why is this man dancing to his phone? And here's the tweet, right? So it's from the Bank of England. The Bank of England says, stock flow consistent models, an extra tool for monetary and financial policymakers. So this is a little paper that we wrote that took 4 years. And a lot of convincing, a lot of sales. So what? That's so what. I did a little dance, people looked at me, I didn't care. I was very happy. This is the first step. There's many, many more things to be done. Many, many more things to be done. I think progress is possible. I think it is unique. I think there is something different to be offered. And fundamentally, I think that the degree to which we can be useful to policymakers, the degree to which we are an extra tool for monetary and financial policymakers, not the new tool, is the degree to which we can judge the success of this enterprise. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Jesper, are you ready?